This week, Donald Trump is sweating. Sweating because special counsel Jack Smith's grand jury in Washington, D.C., that is deciding whether to indict him over his efforts to overturn the 2020 election is scheduled to meet this Tuesday and Thursday. It was just a week ago today that the twice impeached, twice indicted for now former president said he received a target letter, which is usually the last step before formal indictment. According to NBC News, Trump's target letter outlined 3 federal statutes he's accused of violating: deprivation of rights, conspiracy to defraud the United States, and tampering with a witness. Donald Trump is sweating, and when he sweats, he threatens, from unleashing a bevy of threats on his social media platform to saying this last week to a conservative radio host in Iowa.
That, for example, they do say Jack Smith says, okay, I'm going to put Donald Trump in jail.
I think it's a very dangerous thing to even talk about, because we do have a tremendously passionate group of voters. I think it would be very dangerous.
A twice impeached former president who stands accused of inciting an insurrection in a failed bid to stay in power must be held accountable. If he is indicted by the D.C. grand jury, it will be by citizens of the United States. And whether he walks free or goes to jail will be decided by a jury of his peers. That's what Republicans like to call the rule of law. What would be very dangerous is for the rule of law not to prevail. Joining me now, lead impeachment manager in Trump's first impeachment, member of the January 6th House Select Committee, and author of Midnight in Washington, Congressman Adam Schiff. Congressman Schiff, welcome back to the Sunday Show.
Thank you. It's good to be with you.
So what do you make of these 3 particular charges: deprivation of rights, conspiracy to defraud the United States, and tampering with a witness?
Well, I think these are the most serious charges that he faces yet, if indeed this grand jury or these grand juries indict. The Mar-a-Lago documents case was a threat to our national security. It's very serious. Obviously, the multiple business fraud counts in New York are also serious. But this is essentially a set of charges revolving around his efforts to stop the peaceful transfer of power. For the first time in our history, it's hard to imagine a president being involved in more serious misconduct. So it's the most serious thing he's faced yet. And, you know, these not so thinly veiled threats of violence are just what Donald Trump does when, you know, the law catches up with him. He's done it now repeatedly. We saw on January 6th that that incitement can lead to real violence. And we have to hope that the American people will allow the court system to run its course. He will be presumed innocent. The prosecution will have the burden of proof. That's the way it should be with any other defendant. That's the way it will be with him. But we have to, I think, let the court system play out and never resort to using violence as a way of resolving differences.
Congressman Schiff, how do these reported charges comport with what you learned as part of the January 6th Select Committee? And should we be concerned that incitement to insurrection, which is what he was impeached for, as you know, in Congress, isn't one of the listed charges?
Well, you know, I think the charges that are being contemplated here that were referred to reportedly in that target letter are very serious. You know, the first 2, the conspiracy to defraud and the conspiracy to deprive of rights, I think they're really flip sides of the same coin. That is, if you're trying to defraud the American people by, you know, pressing state elections officials or others to find votes that don't exist or to engage in a fake elector plot, you're also depriving them of their right to vote because you're diluting that vote with a bunch of fraudulent votes, or you're taking that vote away completely by having these fake electors that choose the president instead. The witness tampering will be interesting to see what witness that charge refers to. But all of these matters, I think, are deeply serious. They comport with the evidence that we found. In terms of an incitement charge, you know, my sense of Jack Smith is he's doing what he should, which is he has been very conservative, and I think in his charging decisions to date. That is, you can charge additional crimes, but the question for prosecutors is, what's the strongest case? What are the strongest charges that best match the facts? And I think, given the difficulty of this kind of prosecution to begin with, adopting that kind of conservative strategy makes a lot of sense.
Congressman, William Russell, a former White House special assistant who then went to serve as the deputy director of presidential advanced operations, testified before the grand jury last week. Did your committee, did the January 6th committee speak to him?
I would have to go back through our voluminous transcripts. I don't think that I was present if he was one of the witnesses deposed, but we interviewed hundreds and hundreds of witnesses, and I just couldn't tell you at this point.
Okay. As these investigations and looming indictments are unfolding, and there are so many of them, are you learning anything new, anything you didn't already know?
So far, we haven't seen what the evidence will be if charges are brought vis-a-vis January 6th. I would imagine, though, there will be a whole body of evidence that was not known to the January 6th committee because many of the witnesses that the grand jury is hearing from are people that refuse to answer questions before Congress. And we just didn't have the enforcement mechanism to require it, and it couldn't be done in a timely basis. As you'll recall, we referred several people for prosecution for contempt of Congress for not answering questions or just not showing up. And we only batted about 50% in terms of whether the department would enforce those subpoenas. And those cases have still not reached final conclusion. So the Justice Department has a much greater capability of compelling testimony. I would imagine there's a whole body of evidence that we didn't have access to. At the same time, I do believe that the work we did, the evidence we put forward to the country and to the Justice Department, really compelled them to look at these serious allegations of criminal activity by Donald Trump. I'm not sure that would have happened in the absence of the work that we did on the January 6th committee.
Mm-hmm. In the classified documents case, we have a trial date set, May 20th, 2024. How important, though, is it that Trump face trial before the election?
Well, that will ultimately be a decision that voters will have to make, and they will not have complete information if the case doesn't go to trial until after the election. But the case will go with what the judge decides. That initial trial date may not be the last trial date. And you can certainly expect, and we see the Trump lawyers pushing to delay. And what they're saying publicly, of course, ought to, I think, breed great skepticism with the judge, because they're proclaiming victory because they've been able to delay the trial as long as they have. That's not a victory unless your goal has nothing to do with justice or your defense. Your goal is a political one. And the judge, I think, needs to be very skeptical of the Trump defense efforts because there is a public right to a speedy trial. The trial date shouldn't be subject to manipulation to suit Donald Trump's political calendar. And I think there's a great interest in having this resolved before voters have to make a decision who they want running the country.
In the minute that we have left, Congressman Schiff, as you know, Speaker McCarthy has said he supports expunging Donald Trump's impeachments. What do you make of that prospect, especially as the lead impeachment manager for his first impeachment?
There's no constitutional provision, no constitutional mechanism to do such a thing. It's a farce. That doesn't mean they won't do it. McCarthy and the Republican leadership in Congress have shown that there is no floor below which they will not sink to debase themselves for Donald Trump. And so we could very well have a vote on it. It will be a meaningless sop to their most flawed, unethical leader. And Kevin McCarthy probably won't have any problem with that.
Congressman Adam Schiff of California, thank you, as always, for coming to the Sunday Show.
Thank you.